18a of the Mishnah. Just a bit of a review. The Mishnah says if you find a divorce, if you find a emancipation, or a daitiki we'll see is a will, a shayvron is a receipt, you don't return them. Why don't you return them? Because you presume that they were written but were not given. Okay, so Gemara says the implication of that is that if the husband or if the owner of the slave agrees, then you would give it. You would give it. I think Gemara questions why. Even if the husband admits that the document is that he did write a divorce and gave the divorce, or wrote an emancipation and gave it, why are we concerned of two Yosef ben Shimon's? This concern is most specific by divorce. Maybe this document is not the real divorce. Maybe this document belongs to somebody else whose name is identical and whose wife's name is identical. That's the Gemara's question. So Raminu, or in 2 lines into the Gemara, in 18a. Somebody loses a divorce. So he's a shliach, he's a messenger to carry a divorce, and he loses it. So if he finds it immediately, so then kosher the imlav, but if not, posel. We'll have to define what immediate means. Okay, but the point here is the guy lost it for a couple of days, then he found it. We'd say it's not valid. Why is it not valid? Because there's a concern of Shnei Yosef ben Shimon, two people with identical names. And this is not the same divorce that you lost. So Amar Rabba explains, like Kash, it's not difficult. Kamma Okay, so if the guy was hiking through the mountains, and in some isolated place he lost the divorce, and then he went back to the place and found that that is ein sheyaris mitzias. The caravans don't pass through there. Therefore, we presume it's the same document. However, if it's sheyaris mitzias, he loses it in a rest stop where people drive by. So then, in that case, we're concerned that maybe it belongs to a different person whose name is Yosef ben Shimon. Okay, Rabba adds, Rabba says, even if you lose a divorce, like in a rest stop or in an airport, it has to be known that there are two Yosef ben Shimons in the same city. Now, we should really point out here that a divorce must be written. It must have the name of the city on the divorce. So divorce in Portland would write Portland. I'm not sure. It's interesting. You also have to write the name of the river. And I don't know if it'll be the Willamette or the Columbia. Yeah, right. That's also true. Now, it has to be known that there are two people whose name is Yosef ben Shimon who live in Portland. If it wasn't known for certain that there were two such people with identical names, even if you lose it in the airport, you can still reuse the document. So again, in order to be concerned of the possibility that this divorce might belong to somebody else, his name has to be Yehudah Cohen, and we know that there are two Yehudah Cohens in New York. And he lost it in the airport. Okay. Okay, because if you're not going to say this, if you're not going to point out that you must know for certainty that there are two people with identical names, Kash the Rabba ad Rabba. There would be a difficulty. There would be a contradiction from what Rabba said on himself. Why? There was a divorce that was found in the court of Rav Huna. Now, the court of Rav Huna, you might imagine that's like an airport. People go in and out. And it said in that divorce, it was talking about a person who lived in the town of Shviri that was on the river of Rochas. Rav Huna says, Chashina l'shnei Shviri. We're concerned about a second town that's also called Shviri. Just like we have there, just like you said, there's Portland in Oregon, there's Portland in Maine too. There's many cities that exist in every state, same name. So Rav Chizah said to Rabba, "Puk ayim ba de l'or de boy menach." So Rav Huna says we're concerned about two cities that have an identical name. So Rav Chizah tells Rabba, "Go look into this." The or de boy menach Rav Huna nafak v'eshkach. So he went out and he found the Tanah. The Mishnah says, "Kol ma'aseh bezdin hareza yachsar." If it's an act of court, you can return the documents. The Gemara says, "Va'bedina de Rav Huna the chimagam shiras mitzuyisdam v'kapasha Rabba yachsar." Rabba's resolution was you could return the divorce, even though the court of Rav Huna was like an airport. People were going in and out. Alma, we see from here, according to Rabba, the critical component is, do we know that there are two towns named Shviri? Or do we know that in one town of Shviri, there are two people whose name is Yosef and Shimon? Yosef and Shimon, obviously, is Yosef, the son of Shimon. Okay. So again, according to Rabba, there's two conditions. In order to be concerned with the possibility that the divorce might belong to somebody with identical names, number one, it has to be lost in a public area, a thoroughfare. And number two, it has to be it has to be known that there are two people with identical names. Okay. Over to Rabba Uvda. Rabba followed his own opinion. Bekisna de Pumpadisa, in the house of flax of Pumpadisa. Kishmaitz, like his opinion. Let's explain. Igadamri, some say, there are two versions of the story. One is that the place of flax was actually a flax marketplace. And in that case, there are people going in and out, but it was not Huchsik Shnei Yosef and Shimon. We don't know for certain that two people exist with the same name. Even though caravans, people traveling through, were common. The Ikadamri, some have a different interpretation. Hecha de Torah Kisna. It's a place where they soak the flax. However, the place they soaked the flax apparently didn't smell very well. It's very good, and people stayed away. So it wasn't a thoroughfare. So even though there were two people whose name was Yosef and Shimon in that town, and because the divorce was lost and found in a place where people don't frequent, so therefore, Rabbi said you can return the divorce. Okay, let's just introduce the next Gemara by summarizing it first, so I don't lose you. Okay, so we explained Rabbi's opinion, right? Let's review the structure of what we saw, and then I'll give you the structure of the next Gemara so we can see how they interface with each other. Okay, so the structure of the Gemara was we have a contradiction. Right, our Mishnah says Amar Tnu Noisnin. The implication of our Mishnah is, it doesn't say it specifically, but the implication is that if the husband agrees to the divorce, as you find a divorce and the husband agrees to it, you return it. Another brayta seems to imply you don't return it. Says Rabbi, the resolution is, was the divorce found in a place with a lot of people? And Rabbi added in the additional concept that we must know for a certainty that two people with the same name exist. In order for there to be a potential concern, even when the husband agrees the document is valid. Rav Zera is going to do the same thing. He's going to ask from a brisa and come to, roughly speaking, the same conclusion. And the Gemara is going to want to know why Rabba asked from a Mishnah, why Rav Zera asked from a brisa. And just to be very simple, Rabba asked from a Mishnah because we always prefer to ask from a Mishnah over a brisa. However, Rav Zera asked from a brisa because Rav Zera says that the Mishnah is only implied, and Rav Zera disagrees with the implication. So you have the structure of the Gemara. Okay. Rav Zera Rabbi Masisin Abraisa Umashani. Rav Zera asked this from a Mishnah on the brisa, and he explained. Okay. Tonight we learned. We are on 18b, about a third of the way down. First one line is Hamevi get. Okay, you find the divorce immediately, it's kosher. You wait a little bit, you cannot use the divorce. Why? Because the possibility that two people with the same name exist. V'ramini, I have a brisa that this brisa is basically paraphrasing the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Bava Metzia. Matzah get isha b'shok. You find the divorce of a woman in a marketplace. Bizman shahabal maida yachzor leisha. If the husband admits that the divorce is valid, you give it to the woman. Ein habal maida, the husband doesn't admit it. He says he wrote it, but he never gave it. Lo yachzor lo zevel zeh, you don't return it. Kitani miyas bizman shahabal maida yachzor leisha. V'afil zman meruba. The brisa says if the husband agrees to the divorce, you give it back to the woman, even though it wasn't found immediately after it was lost. And in other words, the brisa here seems to imply if the husband agrees the divorce is valid, you give it back, despite the fact that there might be concern of two people with identical names. So the Gemara says no. The resolution is it depends if their caravans frequent the area. If the caravans frequent the area, then you must find it immediately. If you don't find it immediately, you don't return it. If the caravans, however, do not frequent the area, then even if you find it a long time later, it would still be kosher. Okay, Ikadamri, some say, Vahusha Hochsiku. 1 second. Ikadamri Vahusha Hochsiku Deloitte Header. The scenario where you don't give back the divorce is only in a situation where we know for sure that there are two people with identical names. V'hainu de Rabba, and that would fit with Rabba's opinion. Ikadamri, some say, however, Avgav Deloitte Hochsiku Deloitte Header Upligi de Rabba. So there are two versions in Reb Zera. One says that you do need to know for certainty that there are two people with identical names, and the other opinion says you don't need to know for certainty. And this may or may not agree with the opinion of Rabbah. According to Rabbah, you do need to know. According to Reb Zera, you might need to know, you might not to. It's a debate. Okay, so Reb Zera comes to a very similar resolution as Rabbah. I understand why Rabbah asks from a Mishnah, not a Brisa. You always prefer to ask a question from a Mishnah. But why does Reb Zera not agree to Rabbah? Amar Loch, and the answer is, Reb Zera would respond, Mikitani ha'amar tnu naisen v'afilu zman meruba, dilma ha'amar tnu naisen u'l'olam kedekayim alon la'altar. Okay, let's go through the Mishnah again. The Mishnah says, you do not give it back because maybe they were never given. Maybe these documents were written but never given. But it could be that the Mishnah would not disagree that even if the husband agrees that they were given, they also aren't returned. The Mishnah is not discussing the concern of two people with identical names. In other words, Reb Zera disagrees with the implication of the Mishnah. He says it could be that the Mishnah does not imply that if the husband agrees, you would return it. Could be, according to the Mishnah, you would not return it. That's why he has to ask from a brisa. Okay. According to Rav Zera, we're talking about when don't you return a divorce in a place if it was lost in a public space, lost in an airport, even though we don't know for certain that two people have identical names. Upliga de Rabba, this disagrees with the opinion of Rabba. So in my committee, what's the debate? The Gemara says Rabba Savar Diktoni Kol Ma'aseh Bezdin Harezi Yachzer Deishtagach Bezdin Askina Ubezdin Kamagam Shashiyaros Mitzuyas V'Hu Shehochsiku. Rabba argues that when we talk about an act of court that was lost in the court, what does that refer to? It means a divorce that was lost inside of a court. And a court is like an airport. People go in and out. Okay, and therefore Rabba has to say that. One second. And Rabba has to say that it's returned if it's not certain. It is not returned if it is certain. Meaning, if we know two people in town have the same name, and you lost the divorce in court, then we do not return the divorce, because it could be it's the other guy who divorced his wife. But if it's not certain that there are two people with the same name, we have no reason to suspect that, and therefore, even if it's lost in a public area, it is returned. Rav Zera argues that the act of court, meaning a divorce, but it wasn't found in court. It was found in some obscure location. And that's why it is not that is why it could be returned. Because if it was found in a public location, it would not be returned, even if we don't know whether or not two people with the same name exist. Yeah? Okay. Rabbi Yomi says, Rabbi Yomi says, we're talking, there's another possibility here. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So Rabbi Yomi has an alternative resolution. Even if you'll argue that we're always concerned about two people with identical names, we have another way to verify the document. The witnesses say they only signed on one divorce ever in their lives with these names. So that clearly validates the document. What?
Back for who? Because if there's two people.
So you find a divorce. The husband says he gave it. The witnesses say we only signed on one such divorce ever with such names. Well, if it's only one such divorce, obviously this is it. Okay. If this is the case, obviously you're going to return the document. Well, there's still another problem here, right? Maybe not only was Yosef ben Shimon and his wife's name the same, maybe the witnesses were also the same witnesses, right? So the Gemara says, it's hard enough to find two common enough identifying features, like two names that are common. To find four names that are common, it's virtually impossible, and therefore we're not concerned about that possibility. Rashi says, okay, so let's just skip ahead a little bit. We'll pretend we're in the next parak. We'll get to this very soon. But learn about the laws of lost objects. And you identify a lost object with what's called a siman, a sign, something that's unique about the object. And we'll discuss this more later. But let's just say that simanim go into two categories. There is simanim of hakam and simanim she'enim of hakam. Okay? A siman muvik is something that's extremely distinct. A siman she'enim muvik is something that, it had scratches on the rear side. It was, on the left back corner. It could have existed easily for many items. The Gemara will debate whether the fact that you can identify a lost object by a sign, by a siman, is that biblical or is that rabbinical? But everyone agrees that a siman muvik is biblical. A siman muvik is an extremely specific identification feature. So let's give an example of that. So Rashi gives an example of a siman muvik. Rashi He says next to that, so I think I've shown you a get before. It has very long lameds and nuns. The letters stretch up very high. And the idea over here is that you can't put in an extra line. So every line has long nuns. So you have a line here and a line here, and then the end of the nun sofit, the end of nun comes down and the lamed goes up. And they cross each other. So you couldn't fill in an extra line because then the divorce wouldn't work. So the guy says by that long nun, there's a little hole in the paper. Now, by the way, cloth does have holes. If you've ever taken cloth and hold it up to the light, you can see holes in it. It's not terribly uncommon. Okay. But he says the hole was, you look it up, you hold it up to the light, you'll see it, it's next to that letter. But if the guy says there's a hole in the left side of the paper, that's not gonna fly. And the reason for this is because Rav Ashi is not sure whether or not simanim are biblical or they are rabbinical. So therefore, Rav Ashi will only allow you to return the divorce with a siman muvik. That's how we know that this divorce belongs to you and not to somebody else whose name is Yosef ben Shimon. Okay. Rabbi Bachana, bottom line of now top line of 19a. He lost the divorce. He was a messenger. he lost the divorce in the study hall. Amar, so he said to the students to give it back to him. And they gave it back to him. See, he wasn't sure why they gave it back. There are two ways that Rabbah was able to identify the documents. One is through a siman. A siman is a unique identifying feature. The other possibility was that they said that Rabbah has tvias ayin. What is a tvias ayin? So if you own a car, right, and you parked. I have this now. The car that I just bought is a pretty popular model, and it's not uncommon for me to park next to people that have a similar car.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of recognize your own car. You can't sort of pin it down to any siman.
Dense.
What?
Dense.
No. It's this.
DNTS.
No. This is independent of any dents. Car doesn't have any dents. You can sort of identify it. You can recognize your own item, not necessarily because you link. It's subconsciously you link it to identifying features, but not because you actually know what those identifying. You can explicate what exactly those features are.
The sippy cups in the front passenger seat.
Okay.
They're not allowed to sit up there.
Okay. So tvias, that's what sort of tvias ayin is. Tvias ayin is you sort of recognize it without maybe understanding exactly why you recognize it. Now, in this case, Rabbah had both of them. He knew the simanim of the document, and he also had a tvias ayin. He's also able to instantly recognize it. Yeah, you have sometimes also when you're looking for something, you're looking for a file, and you sort of know what you're looking for, and you just rip through all the files. You don't actually read the files, but you're looking for it, and then when you find it, you pull it out. Okay. So those are the two identifying features he was able to point and say, I know this is my document, and they gave it back to him. So he wasn't sure what the reason was. So let's explain. So he told him the simanim, he said the tvias ayin, and they gave it back to him. Amar lo yadan, he said, I don't know, imishim simana hadruni alev kasavar simanim deraisa. Was because the signs that I gave them, and they hold that those signs were deraisa. These were regular simanim, not simanim muvhakim. Again, simanim muvhakim are very, very unique features. And regular simanim are not that unique. So he wasn't sure if they were not unique features, but they're of the opinion that say simanim are biblical. Imishim tvias ayin hadruni alev. Or is it because I have a tvias ayin, meaning I sort of recognize the document? Now, this type of recognition only works the daf katsur b'marabanan. Specifically, Torah scholars are trusted with this type of recognition. But a regular person is not believed when he makes this argument. When he says, I recognize the document. I recognize that it's mine. It's only if he's a scholar. Okay, let's go back. Gufa, the original Gemara. If you find a divorce in the marketplace, if the husband acknowledges the divorce was transacted, it was given, the woman is actually divorced, so then you give it back to the woman. If the husband doesn't acknowledge that, you do not return the document. Okay, when the husband admits that the divorce belongs to the woman, then it's given back to the woman. Okay, the next Gemara just goes back and forth a few times. I'm just gonna summarize it first before we dive into it. Okay, basically the concern here is very similar concern that we had in the past. A divorce has two components to it. There are financial components to the divorce, and there's also a sort of what we call an isser component. There's a religious legal component. The religious legal component, obviously, is the woman can remarry, right? She's no longer married. She's not attached to this person. What are some of the financial components? So, for example, the husband is allowed to drive his wife's car, right? He's also allowed to charge rent for it. He's allowed to rent it out. But he's only allowed to rent it out when they're married. Once they're divorced, he can't rent it out anymore. Let's say the woman gets married and she has a car.
Oh, okay.
Maybe she has 10 cars. Okay, he can rent out all 10 cars. He can open up a car rental business, and he gets. And again, in the absence of an agreed upon, whether something else is agreed upon, which is possible, in the absence of that, the husband's allowed to use his wife's stuff, and he's allowed to earn money off of them. So he can rent out the car, etc. He can rent out her house, and he gets to keep the rent. Okay, so he rented out her house. The problem is he wrote the divorce in Nisan, but he didn't divorce her until Tishrei. So what happens? The husband collected rent from Nisan until Tishrei. Then he divorced her in Tishrei with a get that was written in Nisan. And now the woman says, "Oh well, you gave the rent to my husband. Thank you, but I'd like the rent too. That's my rent. It's not his." The divorce says it was written in Nisan. So why isn't that a concern? Okay, now basically in a nutshell, the answer is because there's two components to the divorce. Because because divorce is a religious legal document as well as a document having financial implications. And because of that, as a matter of fact, if the woman wants to collect her rent from Nisan, the rent of her property, she has to prove she got the divorce in Nisan. Previously, we spoke about a loan document. And a loan document, we said, well, we don't return any loan document. Why? Because of this concern. Maybe the guy will collect, maybe the document was written in Nisan, but not given until Tishrei. And the guy will collect from the properties that were sold between Nisan and Tishrei. So why don't we say the same thing? Prove that you got the document in Nisan and you'll be able to collect from Nisan. The answer is very simple, because a loan document that was returned, it was returned for one reason only, to be able to collect, right? And presumably, people are not going to make a distinction between Nisan and Tishrei. They'll allow them to collect from the date that was written in the document. Because the divorce has two components, there's a financial component, but principally it's a religious legal document with religious legal significance. So therefore, we say, look, you have a religious document, I get it, fine. But you want us to look at the financial implications? Prove it to us when you got the divorce. This is in summary is the entire Gemara that we're going to see. The Gemara will sort of equivocate back and forth, but I've just given you the spoiler.
How does one prove it when they were sued in divorce?
Typically witnesses. So they're almost it's a debate whether or not you need witnesses for the event or for the document. Regardless, there are almost always witnesses when the document is transacted. There should be witnesses in the document transaction.
You get it. I have this.
Divorce should be given in front of witnesses.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. Okay, so Gemara says, "Hani chalam Amar." This makes sense. Shopper. Okay, so Gemara proposes as follows: there is an opinion that says that as soon as a husband decides to divorce his wife, he loses all the rent from her properties. If that's the case, then this makes a lot of sense. As soon as a husband writes a divorce, every renter knows they start paying the rent to the woman, because the husband who wrote a divorce, he's clearly thinking about divorcing his wife. No more rent. He doesn't get rent anymore. The husband has rent up until the moment that he divorces his wife. So then what's the argument? In other words, I'm sorry, the wrong phrase. Meaning, what do we do about the fact that there should be concern here that the woman and the husband are going to double dip on the rent? The husband will take rent because he didn't divorce his wife until Tishrei, and then the woman's going to come back and collect rent from Nisan because that's the date of the divorce. Why is that a concern? So Gemara says, no, well, very simple. Amrina law, we tell her, I see raya emas mantigit yadach. Go prove when you got the divorce. Prove when you got the divorce, we'll give you the rent. Fair enough? So Gemara says, well, hold on a second. What about the mission that we just saw a couple days ago, last week? We also spoke about a similar idea. It's now we learned. What happened was, right? I borrowed money from Jules, right? There's a lien in the document. Jules loses the document. We do not return it to Jules, even though we both admit the document is legitimate. Why not? There's this suspicion that the date is incorrect, and that will result in Jules taking away the property from people that bought it from me between Nisan and Tishrei. So Hasnami, well, we have another solution. Liheder, give it back the document. Why don't we give the document back to Jules and tell Jules, well, hold on, you can only collect from today. You want your lien to work retroactively? Prove to us when you gave the loan. Why isn't, just like we're saying by divorce, we tell the woman, yeah, it's her obligation to prove when she got the loan, when she got the divorce. Why don't we say the same rule by a loan? Fair enough? Okay, so Amri Hachagabi Isha Osla Kach Matova. 1 second. So Gemara says very simply. The woman's going to come to get rent, right, from the renter. So the Gemara says, Amri Osla Kach Matova. Amri Haida Drudi La Rabban Lagitim Shindoi Ta'agam V'Tesev. Hash the Ka'asil Mitcher of Tesev Tesi Raya Amos Montagital Yoda. Okay, so let's explain. The renter comes and says to court, says to her, listen, he says, I know why the court gave you back the document, so that you can remarry, because a divorce has a document with religious significance. You can remarry. Fine, that's why you got back the document. They didn't give it back to you to collect rent twice. You want to collect rent? Prove me when you got the divorce. However, pshita. In the case of the loan, why did you give it back to Jules? Obviously, the reason is the reason why you gave it back to Jules was so that Jules would be able to collect from the property with a lien on it. Clearly, by returning the document, the rabbis returned it for no other reason other than collecting from a lien. And clearly, they're instantiating the lien retroactively by returning the document, and therefore we can't return it because we don't know when the document was transacted. Good. Okay. Next Kamma is very similar. Shechruri avodim, the emancipations. Toner abonon. What's a shtar shechur b'shuk? B'zman sharav moide yachser. If the brisa clearly indicates if the master acknowledges the emancipation is valid. Yasalev, you give it back to the slave. You don't return it to either one. So the Gemara asks, when the master admits that the emancipation was given, you return the emancipation to the slave. Why? It's a lot of words. What does that mean?
Yeah, well,
What does that mean? We have the same exact problem here. Okay, emancipation was written in Nisan. Now, before we get to it, let's explain. If a slave, by and large, a slave does not own anything. Anything he owns is owned by his master. Okay, as a matter of fact, the only way for a slave to own anything is if somebody gives something to a slave on condition his master doesn't get it. Okay, so the slave was doing business from Nisan till Tishrei. And he made money, and the master took all the money away and sold it. Okay, took all the property away and sold it because he said you're not freed yet. Then, sure enough, comes Tishrei time, and the slave pulls out his emancipation that was written 6 months ago, and he tells all the people that bought property from his master, "I'd like my property back. My master was in effect a thief." Why isn't this a concern? It is a concern. Well, then we shouldn't give back the emancipation. Okay, so now again, we go to the same story again. Okay, let's explain this. There is a fundamental debate. By the way, the general consensus in Talmud is not like Abaya. Abaya says, it's not like this opinion. There is an opinion that says that a slave would like to be a free man. And therefore, according to that opinion, if you combine that with Abaya's opinion, Abaya says that as soon as the document is signed, which is the date the document was written, they effectively acquire the document on behalf of the person who wants the document. Because the slave wants to be emancipated, as soon as it's signed, the slave is emancipated. And therefore, legitimately, he collects from Nisan. Right? Because that was when the document was written. And the document is effectuated immediately after it's written. It's self-executing. However, the consensus opinion is that a slave does not want to be a free man. And the reason for this is twofold. Let me just remember this. Hold on. Two reasons. If the Eved belongs to a Kohen, he can no longer eat Truma. The slave of a Kohen is allowed to eat Truma. The slave of Yisrael is not. And if he's a regular slave, it doesn't belong to a Kohen, he prefer the availability, the promiscuity, and the licentiousness of marrying, not marrying, drop that word, of sleeping around with the maidservants. the mistresses, because there's no marital compact over there. There is no marital compact because the definition of marriage is defined by a free man. A slave cannot get married because he doesn't have marriage as a religious framework, and the framework of marriage doesn't exist in the context of slave. So he prefers the promiscuous lifestyle offered to him by slavery over that of being a free man. That's why a slave would rather not be a free man, and he would rather be a slave. If that's the case, then he's only emancipated when he receives the document, the emancipation. And we're back to the original question: why isn't there a concern that the slave will take property illegitimately because the emancipation was written before it was given? Okay, it's a chayv, it's an obligation. A slave does not want to be emancipated. How can we return the document? Why are we concerned that he might take away people's property without permission, without unjustly? So Gemara says, very simple. When he delivers his emancipation, we're going to ask him to prove when he got it. And the same argument is true just like a divorce. There's two reasons why a slave has a shechur. Number one, to prove he's a free man. He can put on tefillin every day. By the way, a slave does not put on tefillin every day. But if he's a free man, he wants to put on tefillin,
Jewish slave?
So we're talking about an Eved Kanani. I would say he's quasi-Jewish. An Eved Ivri is a person who is a free man who sold himself as a slave. He has the regular laws of the free man. An Eved Kanani is somebody who is the typical pathway to Eved Kanani is someone who was captured in war and as an alternative to being killed, indentured himself as a servant forever.
Forever, for 50 years.
Forever, including his kids and his grandkids. It's the alternative to dying.
Well, okay.
Yeah. In many cases, brother, they got a choice.
Yeah.
Die by the sword or become a slave. Okay, he's quasi-Jewish. He does have to convert, but at the same time, also he has mitzvahs like a woman.
Interesting.
So he does not have the full suite of obligations. Like I said, he does not put on tefillin. Not only that, we don't let him put on tefillin. So he wants to put on tefillin every day. He wants to be counted as a minion. He must have his emancipation with him. Otherwise, we're not going to believe. We'll say he's not a free man, and we won't let him put on tefillin. Okay. What time is it? I'll stop here. Okay. Hopefully tomorrow I'm starting to catch up, and hopefully tomorrow we'll pick it up a little further and start catching up. Next parak is quite enjoyable. We'll get to it in 2 days. Talk about fun.